Well, hello everyone! Running Otaku here. Thanks for joining in. As you can tell, a little bit nasally. It's gotten a little bit cold, so about 35, 36 degrees in the morning when I run, which is about 3 or 4 degrees Celsius, which, as it turns out, is just enough to get me sick. So thanks for bearing through it with me. I hope you can hear me okay. Anyways, this week and when I say we, it's just me, but there's you too, so we are going to be presenting the final results of all the tests that I've been doing over the last several months of 4 devices. The first of which is a Garmin 235. The second is the Apple Watch 3, and then the Apple Watch 4, and then finally the Stryd foot pod. I've tested over a ton of terrain, and I'm going to share those results with you. Just a note about the testing. I'm not going to go into detail here in this video, but if you go to my runningotaku.com blog, you'll see all of the process and all the procedures that I went through to try and make as fair and accurate of measurements as possible. It's pretty stringent, so hopefully it will satisfy you that the results I'm presenting are indeed accurate. But anyways, let's get on with it. Once again, there were 3 tests, and the first of the 3 tests was the spring water corridor. Now this is an open bike path, about 1.4, well, exactly 1.49 miles, or 2,401 meters. It's totally flat, paved bicycle path. It has a little bit of an arc to the left and a little bit to the right, but fairly straight, and wide open skies. I would consider this the easiest of the GPS tests. So, how did the devices perform? Well, let's start with the first one. And before I get into the numbers here, let me talk a little bit about what all these dots mean. So if we look up at the key here, the green dot means that, well, each of the dots represent one trial or one lap. So if you see a green dot, that means that that lap was less than 1% error from the actual distance. The yellow is 1 to 2% error, and the red is greater than 2%. This white dot that you see here is the average of all of those 10 trials, and the arrow represents the spread. The way I computed the arrow was I took the standard deviation of the 10 dots, and then I multiplied that standard deviation by 1.96, which in a normally distributed population represents the middle 95% of all of the measurements within that population. So what I'm saying here is that 95 times out of 100, I would expect, for instance, the Apple Watch 3 to be somewhere between, it looks like just shy of 4% and a little bit less than 1%. So somewhere in that range, 95 times out of 100. So the Apple Watch 3, there were 8 of these trials that were greater than 2% error, only 1 green, so not so great. The second, Apple Watch 4, performed about the same, also not as great. The dots are more clumped together, and that's represented by a more narrow range in the arrows. But the average error is about the same at about 2.5%. So on this wide open course that should be easy for GPS, neither of the two performed really well. So that was 4th place and 3rd place. 2nd place goes to the Stryd foot pod. Here you can see 6 out of the 10 observations were in the green, less than 1% error. On average, about 1%, and really tightly clumped together. So this is what I mean by precision. When all of the dots are clumped together and these arrows are narrow, you have confidence that at any time you run this particular course, you're going to find an observation that lies somewhere in between. And then finally, for the winner, the Garmin 235 did great here. All 10 trials were within 1% error, which is great. And it had the smallest average error, of course. So when we look at the summary, you can see, once again, the Garmin was number 1 with 99.63% accuracy, which is really, really good. The precision was 0.76%. Likewise, the Stryd was just over 1% error, which I would consider pretty good. And that precision was just the same, so really, really good. And as I mentioned, the Apple Watch 4 and 3 performed equal, but let's say equally poorly. About 2.5% error and a pretty wide, pretty imprecise measurements there. So acceptable, I would say, but not great. Okay, so let's go on to the second test. And this is the Mount Tabor Park. It's a forest trail of 1.62 miles or 2,607 meters. Now, this isn't a technical trail. It's up a hopefully extinct volcano, but it's not very steep, and the trail's pretty wide. There are, let's say, 50-foot Douglas fir trees on both sides all the way, obscuring most of the sky. And some of this trail is actually paved roads that cars can get by, kind of on a real narrow 2-lane road. But even in that case, there are trees on both sides. So this is much different than the first test. This is really testing how the watches can perform when there's severe obstruction of the sky, at least, really heavy tree covers. So which one came in fourth place? Surprise, surprise. The Garmin 235, and it didn't do very well at all. It averaged minus 3% error, so it was 3% underreporting on average. And it spanned anywhere from minus 5% error to minus 1%. So everything's red. There's one green and a really big, long set of arrows here. Not so good. So it went from first to worst. Next, in third place, we've got the Apple Watch 4. This one did good. Well, it did well. So it's less than 1% error, which is great. Let's see, 6 out of the 10 dots were green, which is also great. And there is a bit of a spread, so we still see somewhat of a long arrow here. So not bad, not bad. Second place, any guesses? Well, it's the Apple Watch 3. Again, this is the second test in a row where the Apple Watch 3 and the Apple Watch 4 performed almost the same. This was even better, right, in terms of error, probably about 0.5%, and a bit of a widespread here as well. So good on the accuracy, the precision, a little bit wanting. It could do a little bit better. And so, of course, the winner was the Stryd, and the Stryd did really, really well in this forest trail, right? Look how closely all the dots are together, and the error is very, very small. So in these kind of trails where the sky is blocked, the footpod did much better, well, significantly better, let's say, than the 3 watches. And in fact, just for completion, or for complete sake, this is the summary. So the Stryd, nearly perfect, 99.81% accuracy. And the precision was almost identical to what it was in the first test, 0.074%. And the Apple Watch 3 and 4, the accuracy was great as well. But look, the precision, 1.35%, 1.55%. So that's a problem because you're never quite confident when you're running with the watch whether it's actually 99.x% accurate or it's one of those trials where it's off one way or the other. And the Garmin just did not perform well again. Let's see if I can get this red dot here. Yep, it just did not perform that well on this test. Okay, so those were the first 2 tests. The third test is my creation, which is called the Otaku Circuit. It's what I consider a GPS torture test. It's, as you can see here, 10.3 kilometers or 6.4 miles. And it's comprised of 9 sections. So it starts right here on the banks of the Willamette River. And the first section is easy. It's a light blue stretch over a bridge and along the river. And then we get to the first dark blue stretch. And the dark blue stretches are the challenging ones. This one is Electric Avenue. It's short, right? 304 meters. But the entire length, the course is blocked overhead by an overpass. So probably 60-70% of the sky is completely blocked straight above. And also right about here, there's this huge electrical something going on. There's a bunch of really scary electrode looking things. Evidently, this is where the power station is for all of the electric trains that are running through downtown Portland. I don't know if it has a bearing or not, but if electromagnetic interference does have a bearing on GPS, this is a great testing ground for it. Then we have another easy section here through kind of the suburbs. And we get to the second tough section, which is Trailblazer. As you can see, 1,170 meters or 0.73 miles. And this is a technical trail. It's heavily forested as well, so you can only see the sky directly overhead. And it's a narrow single track. It climbs a significant elevation, and it got deep canyons and also switchbacks as well. So throwing everything that you could think of at a GPS device. Then we come up to the next section, which is easy. Again, mostly through kind of suburban environment. And then is Black Diamond, which is another short one at 328 meters. But the unique aspect about this is even though it's a paved road, it's steep. The average gradient is like minus 20%. And the reason I added this to the test is I was curious, when watches report on GPS and you see those little kind of dots on the track, they're plotting out latitude and longitude, but there is nothing about the z-axis, if you will, or elevation. And so I was curious whether or not elevation would play a factor in GPS performance, and so I threw this really steep section in. And then we have a short, easy section, and then the last challenging section is this dark blue one here. It's called Downtown Blocks, and it is 1,366 meters or 0.85 miles. And it's tough. This first part right here is just going through Portland State University, no big deal. But then you get to a series of, I think there's 10 or so of these right angles. And this is going through the downtown environment. Portland is not a huge city, but we have a bunch of, let's say, 10-story buildings. And that's what this represents. I was running about 1 arm's length away from the wall whenever I was running on the sidewalks here, next to a building. And this is to test performance, obviously, in the downtown environment, because what can happen is the GPS signal can bounce off of a structure and then back to the watch. And what happens is when it bounces, it throws the atomic clock timing off, I think, just ever so slightly. And I believe that when that timing gets thrown off, you get what's called kind of ghosting, where the GPS track that you look at on the map is shifted a little bit because of that timing. And so I wanted to see how the watches handle that section as well. And then finally, the last section is just easy back over the, I believe it's the Morrison Bridge, and back to the start line. So that's the Otaku Circuit. Now, I did not run this 10 times because 10 times 10 kilometers times 4 devices is just a lot of running. And I could have done it, but I am training for specific races, and it was just a little bit too difficult to do. Also, I wanted to have a test where it was just kind of a one-shot deal. Like, here's the toughest course. Let's see how well the device can do. And then I thought, well, I won't do just one because that could be unfair. There could be some wildly uncharacteristic result. And so I did each device twice. So again, I only ran with one watch or the footpod at a time. Did one loop, which for me on this kind of challenging course with a lot of crazy terrain was about 55 minutes. And then did a second lap, another 55 minutes. And then on the next day, I did the second device and so on. So let's take a look at how each of the devices did for their 2 laps. Well, any guesses as to what was 4th place? The Garmin 235. It didn't do that bad, actually. The first one is, a little bit less than 2% error. The second one was a little bit greater than 2% error. And the dots are pretty close together, so I was happy to see that. So on this really challenging test, wasn't perfect by any means, but I would say it's pretty good. Apple Watch 4 is interesting. It had one test that was almost perfect. It was just a few meters off after this 55 minutes of running. But the second one wasn't that bad either. It was better than either of the Garmin results, but it was a little bit over 1% error. So, who came in second place? The Stryd, actually. 2 green dots, which is great, and pretty close together. So neither was as good as the Apple Watch 4's best, but they're both really good. So whether it was an easy section or these kind of crazy sections I threw in, even that gradient seemed to do pretty well. And then first place, of course, goes to the Apple Watch 3. And this really surprised me, right? Like 2 green circles, almost identical. In fact, over this 55 minutes of running, over 10K, one lap was off 10 meters, and the second one was only off 8 meters. I mean, that's really, really good. In fact, it's suspiciously good. I was wondering what was going on there. that was one thing that I really wanted to take a deeper look at. The other was the two Apple Watch 3 laps performed just about the same as the really good Apple Watch 4 lap. But then there was this one outlier. So I wanted to figure out what was going on with the Apple Watch 3 and 4. Why we got 3 almost perfect scores, how that happened, and why this fourth one was a little bit out. So, of course, I took a deeper look. Oh, this is the summary. So just what I said here, 99.8% accuracy, a 99.9% accuracy for this Apple Watch on the second lap, etc. So I would say the first 3 watches did pretty great. The Garmin, not bad, because this is a really tough course. So the Apple Watch 3. Now on this graph, what I did was I took the 9 segments that I just described to you and laid them out separately. The hard ones like Electric Avenue and Trailblazer are in bold print. And you can see on the easy ones, in general, the Apple Watch 3 did really well, a lot of green there. What happened though was on the hard ones, look, these two, they were right side by side, 5.9% error on both on Electric Avenue. And then Black Diamond, they were off over 3%. Downtown Blocks, one was great, one was a little bit off. But then look what happened. On this Forest Trail, Apple Watch 3 just blew it. Minus 7.8%, minus 9.2%. At that point, you might not even have a watch. It was pretty bad. But what happened here was that the Apple Watch overreported in almost every instance, but on this one, it's significantly underreported, and that error was both opposite and nearly equal to the sum of all the overreporting. So when you averaged everything up, it came to almost that perfect score where it's just off by a few meters per lap. But when you take a deeper dive, you can see it was kind of all over the place. I'm trying to get this stop back again. There it is. I was just bouncing around there. So the accuracy was great, but how much can you trust this? Well, I would be scared to trust this for more than, let's say, 3 or 4% accuracy. So Apple Watch 4, same thing pretty much. A lot of green on the easy sections, and these errors are almost, well, they are exactly the same, 5.9% for both on Electric Avenue, then Trailblazer, the exact same 7.8% and 9.2%. So something's going on here where they're both reporting the exact same error, and in this case way over, in this case way under reporting, and everything mostly canceled out. But there is one difference of note here, and that's downtown blocks. The Apple Watch 3 had, I think it had a yellow dot right here and then a green one here, but there is one, on one of the laps, the Apple Watch 4 just blew it here at like 2% plus error. And so I wanted to see if I could what happened on that one specific lap with Apple Watch 4 in downtown blocks. And this here is the satellite imagery of those data points plotted. So there's 2 laps here, the yellow one. Oops, let's try that again. The yellow one is the first lap, Apple Watch 4, and then the blue one is the second lap of the Apple Watch 4. And the first yellow lap is pretty good. Now, when I ran this, I purposely always stayed on this side going across, and then when I'm going down, I'm on this sidewalk. And I stayed on the sidewalk, so the yellow was really, really close. It's off a little bit from the actual sidewalk, probably from that ghosting issue that I spoke of earlier, but it did the path pretty well. Now, the Apple Watch 4 on the second lap was pretty good up until it got to the corner of Southwest Columbia and 3rd, and then it just blew it. Instead of going down here, it just probably got some data somewhere along here and decided to draw a straight line, and the same thing happened here as well. And it didn't get back on track until I got to the start of the bridge where the skies were wide open, and it was easy for GPS to pick up reception. So in these two, if you think of them as triangles, it just rode across the hypotenuse. And let's see if I can draw here. If we remember geometry and the Pythagorean theorem, the ratio of a right triangle where the 2 sides are even is 1, 1, radical 2, which is like 1.4. So it should have added up to 1 plus 1 equals 2, but instead it added up to 1.4. So it was about 30% underreporting for those 2 triangles. Let's see if I can get rid of this. For these, yeah, for these two triangles, it underreported by about 30%, and that was just part of the longer downtown blocks that kept going. So just for the sake of completion, I went ahead to kind of share with you the results for the Stryd and the Garmin 235 for the Otaku Circuit. And as you can see here, Stryd did really well. A lot of green dots here. A couple of yellow, 1 or 2% error, not that big of a deal. There's one here, this black diamond one. Again, this was the segment that had a minus 20% gradient average all the way. It was off. I'm not quite sure why that is, but outside of that one error, it was really, really solid. And then finally, the Garmin Forerunner 235. In statistics or in economics, I might call this a random walk, right? Because it's on both sides of the line, up and down and way down and over here and up here. It's on both sides of the line, under and over reporting. Sometimes like this black diamond, once it over reported and other under reported, etc. So kind of all over the place. And so, as I said before, it did okay. It's not great. I wouldn't want to use the Garmin 235 on the Otaku Circuit if I was really trying to nail something within a couple of percent, that's for sure. So I have a simple chart here. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it means, this kind of percent errors. So what I did was on this left column, I just wrote down paces. So for instance, this first one is 10 minutes per mile, which is equivalent to 6 minutes, 13 seconds per kilometer. And then all the way down. And then, in terms of marathoning, for instance, 9 minutes a mile or 5:36 kilometer is about a 4-hour marathon. And then if you go down, that's about a 3.5-hour marathon and a 3-hour marathon, 2.5-hour marathon, etc. And 1% error is really good. So if you're a 4-hour marathoner at 1% error on your watch, that's only off 5 seconds a mile or 3 seconds a kilometer, right? That's pretty good. I think that's more than good for every time you look down at your watch. You can kind of adjust your pace accordingly. 2% error also is not bad. So for that same 4-hour runner, that equates to 11 seconds per mile error or 7 seconds per kilometer error. So it's probably within acceptable range. Like you'd probably like to see it perform a little bit better, but not that bad. Where I start having a problem is, let's see if I can draw this here, the 3% error. So let's go back to that 4-hour marathoner. Now he or she has a watch that's off by 16 seconds a mile or 10 seconds a kilometer. And that's where I think the trouble starts. Because for instance, if you are running much faster than the watch is telling you, you're probably overcooking your race. And by the time you get to the last 10K, those last 6 miles, you're going to be in pain. It's not going to be pretty. Likewise, if you're running slower than the watch is telling you, what's going to happen is a lot of aggravation, right? You're going to hit the halfway point where they have the time, and you're going to find out that while you thought you were running really well, you're actually 4 minutes behind where you're supposed to be. And that's going to throw off the whole second half of your race because you're going to be pretty pissed off at that point. So that's why I say once you start getting to about 3% error, if you're one of those that's really concerned about the accuracy of your watch, you probably want to pick something that can stay under 1% or at least under 2%. So what are my conclusions? Well, a few of them. First, let's start with the Garmin. Right, if you're mostly doing your runs in wide open sky, or you just don't really care if you're off by 3-4% or whatever, the Garmin 235 is a great watch. It's affordable. It's rock solid. It's easy to use. And if you need to upload your data to Strava or to any third-party service, it does it quite easily. So that's great. Likewise, if you are a runner in high school and college competitively doing, track or cross country, I'd say the 235 is also a great watch. The reason is because you have probably 3 different types of runs. You've got the easy runs where it doesn't matter so much if you're off a couple of percent. Then you've got the kind of quality training runs, whether it's on the track, or doing intervals on the grass, or doing tempo runs. Right, in all 3 of those situations, you're either on a highly measured track or your coach has laid out the interval for you, so you know exactly how far it is, and you can judge your pace accordingly just using the stopwatch function, on your watch. So for you runners out there that are competing and lucky to have a coach out there with you, I'd say the Garmin 235 is also a great watch for you. So that brings us to the Apple Watch 3 and 4. Now, I was kind of surprised to see that they both performed nearly identically. I think they had the same GPS chipsets in both. I noticed from the iFixit teardowns that the antenna, while it's placed in the exact same orientation for both watches, it looks like it's a different antenna. So I was expecting the performance to be off a lot because of that, but it really wasn't. They perform basically the same. So that means if you have an Apple Watch 3 and you want to upgrade only because you want better GPS reception, don't do it. It's going to be the same. But there are reasons to upgrade, right? If you want much better battery life, a bigger screen, right? Much better heart rate monitoring. All of those are good reasons to go ahead and upgrade. But I can't recommend the watch if you are one of those that's hypercritical or concerned about actual pace or distance, because it's going to be off. The overall accuracy was really great, as you saw on the hard courses in Mount Tabor and Otaku Circuit, but that's because it kind of lucked into it. It just happened that its over-reporting and under-reporting canceled each other out. But on any segment that run, you're probably way over or way under what you think you're doing. So I can't recommend it for those situations. And then finally, we get to the Stryd. Now, the Stryd is really good if you happen to be one of those people that is hyper concerned. Maybe you have OCD and you just want, when you're running and that auto lap goes off, when you hear that beep, you want to be right next to that mile marker or kilometer marker in the race. The Stryd can get you pretty close to that sign each time. Or if you're really, trying to gauge pace for a specific race, I'd say it's a great device to have in those situations. Second, if you are a trail runner, I think it's a device to get. There could be other foot pods that are just as accurate, maybe even better. I don't know. I haven't tested any, but I can say with confidence that the Stryd works really well in the trails, better than any GPS watch you can have. And then finally, the third group of people, of which I'm not one, but those are triathletes, and I think a lot of triathletes are using Stryd today. Why? Well, because they're using power as a metric for their training on the bicycle. And although I haven't talked about it, the Stryd footpod does measure power when you're running. And so it makes sense for athletes that are training with power on the bike to probably want to do so running as well. So for those groups, I would say the Stryd is really good. Now, one thing about the Stryd that I was a little bit concerned about was, even though everything was really accurate in terms of pace or precision and accuracy, I wasn't sure if it was just because I was running on, easy surfaces. So I did a few tests. I did one where I ran in dirt path after nights of heavy rain here in Portland. I did another test last Christmas. It snowed Christmas Eve, which was great. Got a couple inches, and ran in that. And then also in the Springwater corridor, that first test, the wind usually goes along the bike path. So I ran in about a 15 mile per hour wind. In kilometers, what is that? I don't know. 10, 9? I don't know. I'll put it here somewhere. Anyways, I ran in that wind, and for half the time I was dead headwind, and the other half it was right at my tail. And I didn't notice any significant drop-off in terms of accuracy there, too. So I would say that the terrain isn't so much of a factor. I suppose it could be if you're running in really deep sand or super sticky mud or something like a minor tornado, maybe. But if you're not in any of those extremes, I don't think the terrain is going to have a big impact on performance for you. The other thing I did was I wanted to test to see how the footpod would do with different paces and cadences, because I remember the old days when I had a footpod and I did all the calibration and then I ran. It seemed like it worked really well until I suddenly ran a lot faster or slower, or I changed up my cadence. Then everything got thrown off. To me, it seemed like at the time it was just basically a pedometer measuring steps and then multiplying that by some constant to come up with my distance. So I wanted to test to see if Stryd suffered from that same situation. So what I did was I devised a test where I went to the track and I did 12 sets, and each set comprised of 2 segments. The first was running 1,000 meters, which is 2.5 laps. And then I walked the half a lap back to the start and then did the next set. And I purposely picked, I think it was 6 different paces. I did my 5K pace, race pace, which is about, for me, it's about 18 minutes for a 5K. Then I did my 10K race pace, which is about 38 minutes. And then I did my half marathon pace, which is probably a little under 1:30. And then my marathon pace, which was probably, what did I run here? Right around 3 hours or so. So those paces, plus I did kind of what I would call a fast recovery and a slower recovery. So I ran at all those different paces twice, so 2 different times at each of those paces. And as you can see here, so for example, the first one, this is my 5K race pace, SPM or steps per minute, or my cadence, 182. And you can see that instead of 1,000 meters, it measured 1,010, so it was 1% over. Then I ran at my kind of easy recovery pace, which is this here, at 171 steps per minute. And it underreported by 7 meters, so 7% underreporting. And then, for instance, this is like probably my 10K pace right here at 180 steps per minute, and it was almost perfect. So anyways, you can see how I went up and down in paces and up and down in cadences, ranging from 171 to 185 for this one. Whew, pretty good. And the error stayed, there was one that was 1%, one that was minus 1%, but everything is less than 1%, which is really, really good. So it looks like the Stryd doesn't suffer from foot pods of a decade ago. You can run at different cadences and at different paces, and the performance shouldn't suffer very much. So that's about it. Thank you so much for watching and sticking through to the end on such a long video. If you liked it, go ahead and hit the like button. If you really liked it, go ahead and subscribe. I'm like slowly up to, I think, like 55 subscribers now. I think I'm gonna throw a big party if I ever get to 100. Anyways, that's it for this week. I will continue publishing videos on different devices and different things that I'm encountering. I will also be producing a series on my marathon training. So I was fortunate enough to qualify for Boston, and I'm trying to PR in Boston, which is a hard thing to do on that course because of the conditions, and run my first sub 3-hour marathon. So right now I'm just in base training, building up my miles, but starting January, then I go into hard training. And I want to document week by week and share with you my experiences. Maybe a lot of you are going through the same thing, but I thought for some of you it would be fun to watch a maybe slightly better than average Masters runner as he prepares for hopefully a sub 3-hour marathon. So anyways, I'm really looking forward to that. I hope you are as well. In the meantime, thanks once again for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.